Thank you for taking a few moments out of your time to take a look at this PowerPoint presentation over action research plan that I've been working on for the past 6, 7 weeks or so. The title of this is The Impact of Seating Arrangements on Grades and Behavior in an 8th grade Social Studies Classroom. So formal education has been around for thousands of years. Education before that, much more as far as just transferring information from one person to another. But formally, where there's one person giving out information to a group of people, about 1,000 years, kind of began during the Greek classical age. But it was mainly for upper class men. Women were excluded, slaves were excluded. So it was a very elite kind of setup. And a lot of the times, the way they were set up was like an amphitheater situation. You'd have one above, standing above or in front of people, and they kind of gathered around. There was really no real organization to it. They just kind of sat there or stood there and listened. Modern day education, it really kind of started in I don't know, 18th century or so. United States has offered to everyone. Methods and styles have changed. So, in the modern day classroom, it's much different. It's much more organized. And the physical environment of the classroom is significant today, uh, but I believe it's been undervalued in the importance of what the physical classroom looks like and how important it is to the education process. And the colors in the rooms, use of technology in the room, arrangement of furniture in the room, all kind of play a part into that. And lighting in the room, very important as well. But I want to focus on all of that, not the physical environment as a whole, but specifically the arrangement of seating in the classroom. And so that led to two driving questions for the study. The first one, which seating arrangement shows to have a more positive impact on students' grades in an 8th grade social studies class? Row and column, cluster or group, which is the same, or horseshoe setup. So and the second one is which seating arrangement encourages less behavior problems and improves attitudes towards learning education in an 8th grade classroom. Again, same options, row and column, cluster group, or horseshoe setup. The row and column seating is traditional and it's been around for centuries. It was really introduced in the industrial age. Industrial age, as far as work goes, was very much, um, if you look at old factories, it was very much rows and columns and structured and organized, and maximizing space was the norm. It was necessary. When it was introduced, when education was brought to the United States, the one-room schoolhouse was kind of the architectural structure that was used, and it was necessary to maximize the amount of natural light in the classroom. So in doing that, the number of windows was kind of in relation to how many kids were in the class. So they were designed to have a certain amount of windows to compensate for the number of students in each class. And it was important because now the light was shining over the student's right shoulder, allowing them to see what they were doing. So the rows were close to the windows, or if there was enough light, the windows were big enough to let enough light in, so every kid was able to see, since they didn't have, electricity during this time. But now that technology has changed, and it's advanced with the electricity, the school design has kind of lagged behind, and the traditional row and column is still very, very relevant in today's educational system. The instruction should needs to adapt to allow more hands-on problem solving and collaboration. So schools and education and instruction has changed, but the seating arrangement hasn't necessarily followed suit to compensate or to be conducive in those specific situations. Adapting the classroom setup should be included in this, according to the California Department of Education. They're seeing that there's more collaboration, there's more hands-on with student learning, more engagement in that way with each other, and the classroom setup should be more conducive to that as opposed to the antiquitous industrial age kind of row and column setup. So the row and column is the traditional setup. Students are facing towards the front of the room, towards the boards, the whiteboards, the blackboards. They're sitting in equidistant rows with identical desks and chairs, and their focus is on the teacher or the instructor. So all eyes are up on the teacher, and it's a very teacher-centered class, or there's a lecturer, and so there's not a lot of dialogue, not a lot of interaction between students or between teacher and student. It's really kind of a all eyes on the teacher as the teacher explains whatever the lesson is. The positives of this: there's improved on-task behavior, especially students that were the most disrupted in the class. They seem to be able to focus more with less distractions for the students. And the students in the high interaction zone contribute 6 times more than other interaction zones, and I'll explain the interaction zones in a minute. Negatives: more student isolation, less student interaction with peers, so there's less collaborative learning going on, less project-based learning going on, or authentic learning experiences that are going on as well with this setup. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see high interactive zone, moderate interactive zone, and low interactive zone. And so these are 3 zones that are in the classrooms regardless of whatever the seating arrangement is. And so the first one, the high interactive zone in the row and column, it's the first row closest to the board, and in the center column in the middle of the room. The first row has an unobstructed view of the instructor as well as any material that might be on the boards, and then the middle column has less distractions. They're able to see in front of them, and they're able to see more out of the peripheral too, so they can see all sides of the room in front of them equally, as opposed to maybe someone in the moderate interaction zone or the low interaction zone, and the way of if you were in the very bottom right hand corner, then it's more difficult to see what's going on in maybe the furthest left hand corner of the room. In the cluster or group seating configuration, students are typically looking at each other in groups of 3 to 5 students. There's a lot more interaction. It's more conducive to collaborative learning and more engagement in hands-on activities. And it's easier for when the instructor is desiring more interaction with individuals or clusters of students. He can or she can pop around to different groups, interact, or just observe, see what's going on without disturbing what's going on in that group. Negatives: off-task behaviors can increase. If the teacher is focusing on a group in the front of the classroom, then there might be some, more missed activity going on in the back, or other groups, or things like that. So that can increase when teachers are engaged in one group as opposed to the entire class as a whole. So the interactive zones for this one, so the high interactive zones, if the blackboards are at the top, you can see there are 1 to 2 high interactive zones in each group. The one furthest away from the board has the most high interactive zones in this particular one, and the medium or the moderate zones are closest to the board, but there is a high interactive zone, at least one in each seating arrangement in each cluster. If you look down in the lower right hand corner, cluster group seating chart. There's a link there. You can pull up the seating chart if you'd like to see that. The last arrangement is the horseshoe arrangement, the least popular of the three seating arrangements, least explored, and it's I think many of the reasons are is just the amount of space that is necessary to do this. The positives, however, showed students were more engaged in the teacher's lessons, so more eyes are on the teacher. The teacher can see more of the students at one time. It's harder to hide from the teacher in this setting since there's no one to sit behind because there's all one row all the way around the classroom. The negative in that is that there's significant negative space left in the middle of the classroom. Classrooms aren't designed typically to hold a lot of desks on the edge of the classroom. You have wall space that might be used for other attributes to the physical environment, posters, bulletin boards, whatever it is that might be on the walls in the classroom. So it might be a little more difficult to put the walls or the desks up along the wall. So it's very limited. Space is very limited to have the desks hug the perimeter of the classroom. But this would be the interactive zones in what this looks like. So if you're looking towards the front of the classroom, the blackboards, all the high interactive zones are towards the back, but they're all looking at the teacher, and they have the best view of the front of the classroom, and they can see all the action going on in the classroom. The moderate interactive zones closest to the blackboards, and then you have the low interactive zones, and this one has the most low interactive zone desks of any of the setups. These setups are done with 25 desks in a room, and that obviously is going to vary in size, 20 up to 35, whatever the number is, which makes it even more difficult to have this type of arrangement. However, it is good for discussions as well, debates, and large group discussions. If you're having debates or anything like that, it can work well because kids can volley back and forth to each other and be able to see each other, make good eye contact, look at each other, and work on those skills in this type of setup. The methodology, the participants in the setting, Title I, middle school in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, just down the street from my house. The class sizes range from 25 to 35%, 55-minute classes, 55% boys, 49% girls, majority white, 21% Hispanic, 5% African American, less than 2% Native American, and 1% Asian. My role as the researcher would be to enact a more precise assessment of the relationship between seating arrangements and the students' grades and student behavior. Um, I'm most familiar with the row and column setup. Most of my teaching experience has been in a traditional school with back to basics philosophy, which really does focus on teacher centered um, lecturing and teaching where the students are lined up in rows, and that worked well for my for my style, for the way that I like to teach. So I had to really be careful of the bias and subjectivity of not bailing out on the other seating arrangements because I'm not comfortable or I feel like I'm losing control over the class or whatever it is. And I know I've mentioned that before as far as losing control in class and something that I'm just not comfortable doing. So when there's more group collaboration, there's more opportunity for students to act out, to be off task, and with the classroom setup not being very conducive with the horseshoe arrangement, I can see it being very easy for me just to fall back to my old ways, what I'm comfortable with, and and kind of abandoning the point of this research plan. So I have to be careful of that as the researcher and make sure that um, I follow through with it. And the other thing as well, if say the group or the cluster um, is the one that is working really well, the results, the grades are up, the participation is up, behavior issues are down. Am I really going to want to go on to the next seating arrangement? In this case, it would be the horseshoe seating arrangement because I know what works really well. So, am I putting the students' behavior and grades at risk trying to follow through with this entire research plan, or do I just abandon it, thinking, this is what I wanted. I wanted those numbers to be to improve in grades, and I wanted the behavior issues to be uh, diminished a little bit. So the study design intervention, it's a mixed methods way intervention and collecting data. So weekly behavior log, seating charts, observation surveys, interviews with students, and whole group discussion with students. Triangulation involving colleagues, how certain configurations work in their classrooms as well. So most of these are worksheets. Um, the students will see some of them, and I will see all of them. I will use them to track information, but also just my own observations, and there's a little bit of subjectivity in that as well that I would have to be careful of. Um, student intervention, I'm sorry, study design intervention continued. Classes will be compared to themselves, not to each other. So first period compared to first period in all three configurations, not first period compared to fourth period in the same configuration. So the reason for that is if I have a first period class and a fourth period class, then there are some variables that can change within those classes. So what works well in the first period row and column might not work as well in the fourth period row and column. And so it's important to know what is going to work best for that class. So the row and column, group or cluster, and horseshoe are all going to be compared to each other within first period, and then second period, third period, so on. Data would be collected in forms of grades and behavior issues. Each setting configuration will be intact for 3 weeks per quarter. And the reason my thinking behind that was because each quarter again has its own variables, which make it different than if I restarted every quarter. Then maybe you can kind of reduce or isolate some of those variables, remove them, and get a better idea of if the seating is the actual reason why grades and behavior issues have changed. Um, the data collection procedures. First seating arrangement will be row and column, and cluster group arrangement in the horseshoe arrangement. Pre and post surveys about student seating arrangement preference will be given after each configuration. So there's Appendix D shows there's going to be some questions for the students that what do they think how do they think they will like the row and column, and then the post will be what did they think about the row and column. Did they think that it was going to help their grades, and then did it help their grades? And then for each one, and then we can kind of measure, and then it can look at those for each quarter for each student, see if anything had changed in their thinking throughout the year. Student observations and student interviews, some questions. Do you think the setup is helping you focus on your schoolwork? Are you able to interact more with your classmates in this setup than other setups? So those kind of things get some student feedback. And then the triangulation, other stakeholders will be asked to observe students using the observation forms, and then I can take that information and collect it and kind of use it to get a better idea. The analysis, so the qualitative data collected and coded using behavior logs, student surveys, observation protocol forms, seating charts for each class. So in doing that, in the observation and looking at my own observation logs and the protocol forms for other stakeholders, if I'm looking for certain words, side conversations, or on task, focused, bored, attentive, I can get a better idea if we're all on the same page and kind of seeing the same things within each seating arrangement. It's a little more reliability in that instead of me just seeing something because I might have missed something on this side of the room that someone else was able to pick up. Even if I'm teaching, if I'm engaged with the students, a colleague or administrators in the classroom, they can maybe see some things that I'm not seeing while I'm in the actual process of instructing. So those can be very helpful clues to and keys to deciding what is going to work best for those classes. Patterns collected will be formulated into a thick description, allowing whoever is reading the description to really feel like they know what the class is about, to feel what the class is, to get a sense of um, what the students are going through in that particular seating arrangement. For the quantitative data, the significant number and probably the most significant, the easiest one to calculate will be grades, assignments, tests, journals. Is there going to be an uptick? Will there not be an uptick? And so grades can be really kind of a thing too. And that was one thing that if it was the seating arrangement was row and column first quarter, and then it went to cluster second quarter, and then third quarter, the horseshoe setup, it'd be difficult to tell because those quarters have so many different variables in itself. Did the second quarter grades go down because it was in the cluster or group setting, or was it because it was right before the holidays and kids checked out? So doing the three can kind of maybe I'm thinking help read into that a little bit more. Behavior can be measured through keeping tabs on behavior logs. I'm looking at that myself, and then also collaborating with other stakeholders who are observing. In conclusion, the results of the effects of the seating arrangement on grades and behavior were mixed. When classrooms vary in desk arrangement, differences in achievement were non-significant. According to one source that I read, it didn't matter what the kids did. Essentially, the kid was a high verbalizer or um, intelligent. The seating arrangement didn't matter. If they weren't, it didn't matter. However, another source, poor seating arrangements can affect students' learning by 50%, either positively or negatively. So it does matter. It does play a key into students' learning, and a lot of that could be in the attitudes. The attitudes of the classroom environment can indirectly affect student grades. So if they're more engaged, then their attitudes could be a little more positive, which could positively affect their grades. And the arrangement of the desk is often determined by the type of communication and interaction necessary in the class. So if it's a lecture, teacher-centered lesson, the row and column seating worked well. The high interaction zones held highly verbalized students, and again, those were across the front row and down the center column. Student collaboration, teacher interaction with individual students, the cluster, the group seating was more conducive. For this, the teacher could bounce around, students could interact, they could have better eye contact instead of turning their heads. If there are row and columns and talking that way, they're already set to be able to communicate in a more conducive manner. The horseshoe design allowed more participation and engagement in teachers' lessons, and it was more fitting for a large group discussion or debate. There were some limitations. Class size was a big one. Um, the number of students and size of the actual classroom. So the classroom size may not be changing, but the number of students in the classroom definitely has. So it's difficult to set up different uh, seating arrangements to fit the lesson when there might only be one way that the class can be set up because there are so many desks in there. The horseshoe design was definitely more difficult to create due to so much negative space in the middle of the classroom. And say you have 25 students, and that might work for this horseshoe arrangement. Now, however, you add 4, 5, 6, 7 more desks in there, it makes it more difficult to do that. Isolating variables is challenging to give credit to any change in grades or other academic measures to the setup of the desks. There could be illness or attendance problems, fire drills, shortened periods, and a number of things, and a number of other variables that cannot be controlled that can kind of skew the results as well. And then suggestions for further study, collaboration on a school-wide level, or at least a grade level. So if you have a team of 4 or 5 different um, core classes, core teachers, then get together and see what works. And that would be kind of spreading out to more of a problem-based or authentic learning experience across the board. But that triangulation could be very important, and the collaboration between the teachers could be very important on what is working, what's not working. And the variable of time can be controlled differently. The amount of time the students are on each seating arrangement. So 3 weeks, it just worked out because there were 3 different seating arrangements, 9 quarters in a week, or 9 weeks in a quarter, so 3 and 3 and 3. So doing that, but maybe working per quarter or every 15 weeks or something can lend to more truer results. And again, I personally enjoyed learning more about the others and the significance and how important it can be for the learning process, and how it really is tied to the lessons at hand and the projects at hand, and that really does need to be mixed up to fit whatever lesson that